Welcome to the Always On podcast. I'm your host, Duncan MacPherson. On this podcast, our objective is to always be enabling our audience. These are high-performing fee-for-service professionals to be always working on their business and themselves, personally and professionally. And I have to tell you, on today's podcast, I have great conversation with David Rutherford. Among many other things, David is the owner of Frog Logic. You can visit his website. You can see David on LinkedIn. But this conversation, we discussed so many areas of symmetry based on what a financial professional is trying to accomplish when it comes to leadership with their team, leadership with their clients, and just that best version of themselves. And again, David's credibility is unrivaled based on when you hear his backstory. If you like this podcast, please like and share and tell your colleagues. And of course, if you have any ideas or topics you would like to hear on this podcast in the future, just let us know. Thanks for listening. Hey everybody, Duncan here. I am so tremendously excited for our guest here today. First of all, the theme for this conversation is called Finding Another Gear. And the premise is that notwithstanding that things will continue to be uncertain and volatile with a fair amount of anxiety out there in the world, locally, globally, I have the sense at least that we're about to turn a corner and we're going to get on the other side of this bizarre disruption. So we want to talk about finding another gear and taking advantage of that. So we have a gentleman who is a highly respected performance coach, highly coveted presenter, David Rutherford. How are you doing?
Duncan, my man, I just the idea that there are more gears within all of us gets me fired up. So I'm doing awesome. I can't thank you enough for just one, the courtesy that you've bestowed upon me and the grace that you have in allowing me to come and be a part of. Man, I was going through your book last weekend and man, I tell you what, you are on point with how you look at stuff. So I just feel so honored to be a part of your show, man. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. And I will tell you, I've talked to so many people about our conversations leading up to today. And I punctuate every conversation by saying it constantly amazes me how the people with the highest capabilities also have the highest level of humility. And you represent that. So first of all, I normally provide a bit of a backstory and an introduction, but you have quite possibly the most interesting, but also indirect path to working in the fee-for-service financial services space. So I'm going to let you just talk about what it is you do and, just as importantly, how you got here.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, how much time do we have, right? Is what I always like to ask. I think in a nutshell, what I try and do, and obviously, through my conversations with Chris and Brian Gallery and all the folks at the First Trust Advisory Consulting Group, they were all so wonderful and got on like, tell us what you do so we can help promote you and all this. And remember I was on with Brian and he's like, well, and I was going through it and he's like, well, what can you break that down? Can you get to the abstract? And I was like, yeah, essentially I help people restructure their perception of pain. And the way I have been able to, in some capacity, help people doing that was through my unique kind of the arc of my life so far. I was a Division I athlete that didn't kind of maximize what I believe my potential could have been. And as a result of those failures, it propelled me to dig a little deeper and to really kind of go after those core concepts within us. Like what are the things that really inhibit our ability to maximize that ambiguous concept of potential, right? And so I dropped out of college. I was an art major with a minor in poetry. So don't make fun of me. I'm a hippie who can kill you. So I dropped out and I joined the Navy to become a Navy SEAL and went through the program, spent 8 years in the SEAL teams. In my final kind of year and a half, I was an instructor. And that's where the passion for teaching and the passion for trying to not only explore knowledge in a much deeper level, but then how to transfer that knowledge onto willing participants, so to speak. And that really launched my passion for, coaching and teaching and being in that space. But, when I got out, I returned home to where I grew up, Boca Raton, Florida, and tried real estate. My mom's a real successful realtor, and man, I stunk at that, Duncan, so bad. I was so horrible. And I remember the first night after my mom had a long weekend of open houses. And I remember getting a phone call from a client that she got on Sunday nights, and we had family night dinners on Sunday nights. And this person is just berating my mom on the phone. And I'm like, give me the phone. I'm like, I'm going to end this right now. And she's like, honey, I think you need to find a different profession. So I tried domestic security, worked for a big company out of Grand Rapids, did that for a while, and then just didn't connect to any of it. And fortunately had a buddy who was in need of some assistance. So I made a strong pivot back towards carrying a gun for a living and went to work for Blackwater. And I was an international curriculum development specialist for Blackwater, worked in Azerbaijan, went back to Afghanistan, and did some stuff here in CONUS. And then it was during that Afghanistan trip where I really had a unique experience on an operation with the counter drug commandos, where I wanted to help kids. And that experience really provoked a deeper introspection of myself to really evaluate how much change can you effectuate through the barrel of a gun versus through someone's heart, and in particular child's heart. And how do you prepare a kid for a life that's imbued with suffering and pain? And so that's when I wrote my first book, which was a kid's book, and it was about self-confidence. And, over the next 2 years after leaving Blackwater in 2006, I spoke to about 7,000 kids in North America, and really was trying to teach self-confidence to that 8 to 15-year-old area, that real pivotal developmental phase of identity, personal identity, self-consciousness, self-awareness, self-worth. And it's incorporated all into the umbrella of self-confidence. Did that for 2 years. Then the wonderful economy collapsed, where I was somewhat, I think I was motivated with the shift of back towards carrying a gun for a living. And this time I had the incredible opportunity to go work for the CIA and as a contractor for them. And for 2 years, kind of trained case officers, essentially. I guess the easiest way is how to behaviorally integrate with soft units that they were co-located with downrange, where I learned a tremendous amount in the 2 years teaching. Well, they actually ended up teaching me more than anything I could have ever dreamed. And then I decided to put my money where my mouth was. So I decided to deploy again in an operational construct. And if you ever saw the movie 13 Hours of Benghazi, that's what I did for 2 years. And it was my fourth year with them that my ex-wife said, if you deploy again, we're done. So I didn't want to lose that at the time. And so I stopped. And that's where this kind of random kind of confluence of relationships from my past came to fruition. And a guy who I had gone through training with back in 96 was working in the financial services industry, reached out and was like, hey, Rut, man, are you still talking to companies? And I'm like, yeah, man. Yeah. And he's like, well, are you any good? And I was like, come on, man. I'm a good motivator. And he's like, well, listen, if you're any good, I'll use you, and my buddy will use you, and all the wholesalers in our organization will use you. And that kickstarted a 10-year career. I did 30 events for that organization that year, and I've averaged 40 to 50 events a year since then for the last 10 years. And then kind of in 13, 14, 15, I launched a podcast that turned into a real big podcast called the Team Never Quit Podcast with Marcus Luttrell. And then my performance coaching really kind of took off to where, kind of the highlight of so far of what my experience is 2018. I was able to work with the Collegiate World Series champions, the Oregon State Beavers baseball team. And then in my third year, I was able to help win a world championship with the Boston Red Sox. And my job that year was really to helped focus on developing a leadership program around Mookie Betts, who ended up winning the AL MVP. So it was a banner year for me. But all those circumstances eventually led me back to a relationship I'd cultivated 10 years ago when I first started with that other financial industry services group. And through a close relationship, I was reached out last April by this guy, and his kids are both athletes. And I do a lot of work with athletes and kid athletes. And he just so happened to be a big producer for First Trust. And after a few days, he was like, "Why are you not working with First Trust?" And I was like, "I don't know. Tell me about him." And before I knew it, I got an interview with Mr. Bowen and Andy Rogensack, and they gave me a crack. And that was in August. And in December, they asked me to work full time for them. So that's been the trajectory, the course. There's a lot more in there, but that's as best I can do to shorten it. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Oh, that's a pretty robust resume in and of itself. Although I know you skipped a lot just in the favor of time, but so glad that we got connected. And as you know, that whole First Trust environment, they're such big advocates for the fee for service professional and trying to bring value to them that they'll actually value and apply. So the first thing
can I jump in there real quick, Duncan? Because I just want to say this, man. We've been talking in our preliminary conversations prior to, and even in the conversations I had with Chris as well, leading up to it, man. And digging into your book finally last week, man, it's so remarkable how much greater insight I gained to that world by just understanding the mindset that you guys are trying to teach them. And it was an immense benefit. So I just want to thank you for the suggestion. And then also, the impact that you're having around the world for these people, because you definitely, I think, approach it from that relationship standpoint and how to be you're not just kind of a commodity, as you say, selling that, but you're really trying to help people in those relationships. And I just, hey man, that you guys are on point for that.
I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you for sure. And I will tell you on that point, and you would know this, the best coaches are also the most coachable. That's the irony, because I've had so many conversations with people who have plateaued, and it's a one-way street. It's not a conversation, it's a lecture. They're bombarding you, trying to convince you they're the smartest person in the room. But yet the best coaches, who are that proverbial steady burner for their entire lives, they are sponges. And that's one of the first things I noticed in our initial conversations is you are a sponge. You ask such great questions. The clay is perpetually soft, with humility and credibility. I want to get into that. When you were describing, initially the real estate world with your mom, I just had this vision of you overcoming an objection by putting the person in a headlock. Might have been effective. Might have been a new way to close a deal.
I mean, here in South Florida where I live, if I took that approach, I'd have to put people in headlocks all day long. Unfortunately, it's a different mentality down here for sure. But it's funny that you talk about this. Just this morning, I every Monday, if I'm home and I'm not traveling, I try and work with a guy who's a 7th degree black belt in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And he, and every Monday he just ties me in pretzels and chokes me out and puts me in arm bars and Kimuras and footlocks. And he always giggles because, I've been seeing him on and off for 10 years and I'm still a white belt. And, and it's just like, and it's like, he goes, you know what, David, he goes, you are the eternal white belt. And I take a lot of pride in that because, if you, like you said, if you live in that space where you realize every single day is a learning day first and foremost, but every single day can be a meaningful learning day as well too. Not just the little tidbits you pick up or reading between the lines of the volatility of markets or whatever is drawing your attention, right? Really focusing your attention. you start reading between those lines, and you really, that's where your growth just starts to become immeasurable, really. And so that's why I love the moniker of the eternal white belt.
Yeah, I love that. And, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about plateau avoidance. We just don't want to plateau. And there's just one of the greatest gifts is the ability to become our full selves. And I love that. I take that seriously myself, but I'm fortunate to be around a lot of people who also have that same mindset. I want to go down a bit of a dual track. So first of all, your backstory, incredibly fascinating, but now I want to sort of pivot into application. So I'll first want to acknowledge and circle back later on to the whole frog logic community. So when I first saw the frog, a couple of things came to mind, but the first one of the most powerful stories that I heard early in life that I've relayed to so many young people is the story of the frog and the scorpion. So that's what triggered me when I saw that logo. So if you haven't heard the frog and scorpion story before, if you're listening in, you can go look that up. It is so incredibly powerful. But I'd love for you to just, first of all, what is that image conveying to the world? A frog on a brain.
Thank you for asking that. It's not often I get to explain it. Everybody always looks at it and, I think they wonder, but they don't, they're not quite sure what it is. And, I've had everything for, is the frog eating the brain? Is the frog, as the, to be crude, has he done other things? Is that what the brain is, and all this stuff? And I'm like, no, man, the idea for me is, I come from an organization that has 80 plus years of really elite level training and operational doctrine. And that's the underwater demolition teams of the World War II through Vietnam, and then the SEAL teams from Vietnam till modern era. And, I always like to share that in any capacity, these doctrines, they don't originate in the ivory towers of academia. They certainly aren't cultivated through various think tanks out there or consulting firms. The idea that what we do is we possess these doctrines because we learn on the battlefield for sure. And that battlefield is where we are taught. We learn what works and what doesn't work. We learn what we need to do. So when you look at the history of our organization and you think about the intensity of how we learn our lessons, we learn them on the battlefield. And we learn those lessons through the blood of our enemy and through the blood of each other. And that really ingrains these principles, these are virtues. These are things that we hold so comprehensively as they're almost like rituals, if you will. They have that intensity, right? And I've been reading this great book on the history of religious symbols and rituals, and some of these things that we're ingrained in are tens of thousands of years old, and so we hold those ideas, those TTPs, those tactics, techniques, and procedures, those standard operating procedures. Man, those are derivative of hard lessons learned, and so I really wanted to pay tribute to those folks, right, who have been paving the way for our successes in the modern era with the insane hard work and dedication, and really the sacrifices of guys who've died on the battlefield or in training or as a result of the experience, And so the idea was and they used to call the underwater demolition teams back in World War II, they used to call them the frogmen of the Navy. And because essentially we would do these incredible ops with simply a pair of cheap fins, some UDT shorts, a dive mask, a K-bar knife, and 50 pounds of TNT, right? And those were our tools. And we'd be in the water for 15, 20, 30 hours at a time, depending upon the distance we had to swim to get to these reefs, to blow these reefs up so the landings could take place at Iwo Jima. at Saipan, at Okinawa. I mean, we were the tip of the spear in all those. And then you take it back even further, where we really got our start was at, the Naval Combat Demolition Units in D-Day. We cleared those channels so those landing craft could hit the beach. So I wanted to pay tribute to those people. So that was where the frog came in. And then obviously the logic is to try and be able to share some of these concepts with people, but not in everybody talks mindset. Everybody's mindset. And for me, there's a lot of reactivity within mindset and in certain pretenses, especially under duress, right? Under duress, there's the old famous Mike Tyson saying, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the nose. And so the way I looked at it is like, when we get punched in the nose, our training kicks in and we train harder than you. So there's a logical approach to how we restructure our perception of pain, in particular through, various concepts like violence of action or these different tactics that we employ. So I wanted to get the sense, hey, if you understand this 80 years and you can extrapolate this logic that we use under extreme environments, it can help you in your life. Now, obviously, most people don't have the guns, the bombs, the bullets, and all the other negative stuff in their lives. But, the same context of cognition is applied. And so that's where I really wanted to introduce people to this legacy, this 80 plus year legacy of how we conduct ourselves, both on and off the battlefield.
Okay, terrific. And what's interesting about the logo is it is both intuitive, like you come to your own conclusions, but it still leaves you wanting more. You want a couple of dots connected. And the beauty about logic, there are immutable laws that exist that we have to respect. And then, of course, you take critical thinking along with that. And then, of course, the ability to be nimble that comes from good situational awareness, training, et cetera. My oldest son is fascinated by history, especially it involves conflicts of the past. I will tell you, interestingly, I was thinking about this. Somebody steered to me, pointed an auction to me. And the auction was, among other things, promoting silver coins that had been recovered by teams. This was a ship that went down from the 1600s, a Spanish ship.
Oh, wow.
And I just had tried to imagine the logistics of how they found it and recovered it. It must have been incredibly intense, but I'm looking forward to, because these coins are literally in transit. So 400 or 500-year-old coins recovered from the bottom of the ocean. I can't wait to see those and hold those in my hands. But perfect segue, by the way, because I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Number one, you're a serious student of life, but also of the sector that we're in. I'm curious what you've learned and what you've relayed onto your audiences, because the first person I ever saw speak who was from the world of the military was Norman Schwarzkopf. And he said many very profound things in his presentation, but the one that really struck me was, he said, when it comes to leadership, people always follow character first, strategy second. And that was one of those moments where you're like, wow. I mean, that was pre-mic drop, right? That era that I heard it in, but it was profound. It resonated with me. Very qualitative. I mean, it was validating about integrity and character and all of that. But I'm curious, when you combine the qualitative with those sort of that decorum of how to conduct yourself, what have you learned from a quantitative that you can relay to your audience that is both tactical and actionable, not just a validation of how to live your life, especially when it comes to leadership?
That's a great. I mean, Norman Schwarzkopf. I mean, he was one of the great generals that we've had out there. He was, his his ability to lead us through Desert Storm was profound. I mean, it was surgical in every way. It really showed the competency and the it's a testament to the massive logistical requirement that it is invading a country. And then, I mean, obviously, the big thing in the news right now is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And, one of the commentaries you keep hearing, no matter what source you're reading, is these former generals who are just in General Petraeus in particular kind of sticks out. And as they deconstruct how difficult it is actually to wage war, in particular, if you have substantial resistance. And we know that better than anybody. I mean, the last 20 years, fighting an ideological insurgency, I mean, it's created some pretty substantial challenges for us. And as a result, my unit in particular suffered tremendous losses in the last 20 years. But when I think about leadership as in the context of your saying with the character leading the charge over strategy, one of the things that's unique about our organization is that officers, they go through training with us. And so you don't go to a platoon having look at your officer in charge, your OIC or your AOIC, assistant officer in charge, these lieutenants or lieutenant JGs or even ensigns in some cases. You don't look at them and say, who are you? Where'd you cut your teeth? Where are you from? Because they went through BUDS too. They were in Hell Week too. And in many of the cases in the classes that I was a part of, and I had the unique fortune to stay at BUDS for double the amount of time I needed to because of some injuries and one performance failure. But so I saw a lot of officers go through. And it was the officers who really took that initiative, right? To say, hey, no, I'm going to make sure that you realize I'm going to jump in the trenches every bit is like you are. I'm going to do the hard work too. I'm going to pull the sled. I'm going to be wet and sandy and probably more than you. And I'm never going to complain. I'm always going to have a smile on my face. And I'm going to inspire you to want to mimic or at least, match as best as possible my efforts. And that was really that was a profound lesson for me to learn. And that was kind of how I always tried to lead, whether it was on my whatever sports team I was captain of or whatever. And even, in coaching now, to let you, hey, I've done this. I've gotten out there. I've tried this. I've been in the trenches. I've felt the pain. I've been through, I've had the extended suffering. And through that, you're able to connect with people it legitimizes the information you're trying to share. So, as it comes to when you're leading people, don't forget there's no greater inspiration than the person you're trying to really become a submission concept, right? You're submitting to your own innate desires to want to kind of be out in front, because most people with ambition have some semblance of that integrated into their objectives, right? Their mission orientation. And so, to see somebody go, whoa, no, this person knows more than me. This person has been in the trenches longer than I have. I'm going to attach myself to this person at the hip. Man, that's critical. And that's very indicative of character. Now, I will say, obviously, I've seen officers that have gone through the program, and I've seen case officers, I've seen business leaders, CEOs, I've seen really high functioning, high net worth financial advisors that just, at some point in their career decide they're going to turn the dial down. They're going to throttle back the effort. They're going to, and I don't necessarily want to expose it as complacency, because I don't think that's it. I think they just hit a point where, like, I did the work. I'm here. I want to turn the throttle down and enjoy kind of the fruits of my labor. But there's a problem when you're in a leadership role in that capacity. And I'm seeing this, and obviously what I do with First Trust, I travel with all the wholesalers all across the country. We go to, every place. I was just out in California, Southern Cal for a week last week. I'm in Orlando tomorrow. I think I'm out in Houston come the week after that. So, I'm not just regional, in terms of how that regional culture affects leadership styles or whatever, but it's national. And what I'm seeing is that some people that have been in this business for a long period of time have cut their teeth. They've seen an innumerable, countless changes in how the business itself functions, right? The SOPs, the tactics have changed. Their throttle's down, right? They're not pressing on the gas as much. And I think where the big challenge I'm seeing is that those people who have this immeasurable amount of wisdom in prior past performance to lean on to inspire the next generation, they're just not doing that real well. And then the other component of I'm seeing is that there's such a it's not a subtle difference, so it's more than that. I think there's the demographics of the age groups, of the generational differences is so profound now that those senior leaders that are out there that have this wisdom, there's this profound communication gap, I guess is the easiest way to describe it. There's this communication gap to how do you get this young FA or young analyst that's coming up? How do you get them? How do you inspire them? How do you show them what the actual work looks like? And so that's what I'm hearing a lot of. I'm hearing, I just don't want to drive like I did 20 years ago. And then I'm also hearing, I can't communicate with these people. They don't know what hard work is. And so those are some of the big things I'm seeing right now out there.
Okay, that's going to parlay into this next question beautifully, but you bring something up that's interesting because most of your audience would be lifelong planners who are fixated on strategy for their clients. So generally they are strategic, but maybe during these disruptions, they forget about the sort of bedside manner and the X factor with their clients and their team. Because, back to your scenario about the officers getting in the muck. The rank is respected, but my view is that leaders don't have a sense of superiority. They're incredibly gracious and respectful to human beings, right?
Good leaders,
I'll tell you a story just very, very quickly. I was at a wedding with a friend, and it was actually in Greece, in Athens. And the reception, his uncle was a very respected architect, very, very successful. So this reception was on a rooftop patio under the stars in Athens. It was just surreal.
Wow, it sounds magical.
Yeah, it really was. And so we're there, and it's a beehive with all the people that are helping make this event happen. And anyway, this one lady walked by who was part of the catering team, and she had a stack of very expensive looking plates that she was going to put on a table to help get the food going. And she dropped one. And it was like, the needle on the record player scratches, right? The whole vibe of the area it went quiet. The architect, everybody looked at the architect, and he walked up, and you could tell the lady was concerned. He reaches over and grabs a plate and throws it on the ground. And basically, if I remember correctly, said something to the effect of, "Now it's a party."
Yeah.
And I know that's an extension on the Greek culture and tradition,
Yeah.
but I thought to myself, that might be the most powerful display of leadership I had seen to that point in my life. Symbolic, actionable, but not superior, not sanctimonious, just, hey, it's all good. And it just changed the energy in that area. And so that you prompted that when you were telling me your analogy there.
Well, think about this. Any group gets together, right? First off, whatever the mission is, whatever the goal orientation that brings that group together aside, what has to happen is there has to be guidance, right? And perpetual guidance. And when that guidance becomes diffused, or it becomes decentralized, or when that guidance becomes almost convoluted with multiple concepts, what happens? It's everybody is in doubt. The mission becomes in doubt, and that's why great leaders are constantly reinforcing those concepts, right? And within our community, one of the best things is we always say this, that junior man on the totem pole, if there's a life and death call that needs to be made, you make that call and the platoon will follow you, right? Let's say you got contacted and you're in a channelized area and you're getting waylaid. The junior man sees a little path between a building or to get some cover behind a little dirt mound or wherever. And that junior man says, over here, on me, on me, on me. Everybody stops, listens, looks, and goes with that call. And that's a component of how that leadership should be diffused across everybody on the team, right? Is that you want people to be able to get out there and make calls and make real world calls. The challenge nowadays, I think, in particular, if you really kind of deconstruct the educational system and how we're teaching young people, there's so much pressure being put on young people to be perfect at such an earlier age that there's a paralysis of failure that's kind of embodied within those younger generations. And, I see it all the time. I constantly am being contacted by, parents they think their kids have potential, elite level potential. And they're like, hey, can you evaluate them? Can you see where their mindset's at? And, I'll go spend 5 seconds with the kid. And I'm like, first and foremost, the kid is petrified of failure. So you're never gonna get there if you're afraid to fail. And I think great leaders have that consistency in there, that their willingness to take risks by inspiring the junior people on the totem pole to take greater risks, to get out there, and I'm not talking shoot from the hip, Annie Oakley risks. I'm talking, strategic risk, and whether it's client acquisition or, maybe it's a rebranding or, whatever those components may be. But man, that's another huge role in great leaders, is to say, and this again goes back to what I had alluded to before. What I'm witnessing is, you have people that have these models that they've worked incessantly on for 20, 30, 40 years. And they're afraid to hand it over to these young people because they don't think or act, or they don't learn the same way, or they don't have the same mission orientated or same process. And you're like, I'm not going to give them the reins because I don't want them to destroy what I've built my whole life. But the problem is you're on your way out anyways, and you want to turn it over to, you want to see, but you're not putting in the work to teach them how to fail. So it's this cycle of fear that is kind of overwhelming, I think, people, and in particular leaders.
Okay, so let's build on that, because something I've been talking to a lot of our clients about recently is deliberately shaping an environment of self-actualization.
Yeah, man.
But through leadership, not just telling people, but showing them based on how you conduct yourself and the environment you create. Like what you were talking about, the junior team member, that empowerment and that sense of responsibility probably accelerates their maturity substantially. So it's not a micromanagement environment. It doesn't create learned helplessness. It would be powerful. So I wanted to get to this question here, because now let's get into the tactical in a typical day in your life when you're talking to these people in California or Houston. As we do turn the corner, one of the goals is to try to kickstart the team and get everybody bought in, not just into an optimistic outlook about life, but also the concept of an elevated approach as a team. Like, how can we find that other gear? Have you gotten into some tactics, especially with teams, to help kickstart that?
Absolutely. I think, first and foremost, you always have to have the intelligence that you're utilizing for goal orientation or strategy or mission profiling. It's got to be actionable, right? It's got to be real world. It's got to be timely. You got to know what the battlefield is showing you. And in this case, you mentioned self-actualization and kind of the core of humanistic psychology. What is the battlefield? The battlefield has been pretty hammered over the last 2 years. We had this discussion before. You think about the magnitude of fear that people have been forced to consume, and then also what they've allowed themselves to consume, has in many, many cases promoted a certain psychosis that is very counterintuitive to this another gear level that you're speaking of. And so I think first and foremost, what I'm trying to do with people right now in these teams, whether it's a small RIA I work with, or it's a big wirehouse, or it's a complex that I'm talking to multiple teams at, whatever, the biggest thing is I'm trying to do is get people to reset their perspective, right? Hey, listen, yes, COVID was existential. Yes. It was an unforeseen enemy that was around us at all times that we had no control, or at least we believed we didn't, that was going to take out my parents, my uncles, my aunts, my kids, whatever. And so that when people, again, restructure their perception of pain, and in that case, the pain of death, that's profound. And it causes a pretty significant shift in how people process information when you're having to process information in conjunction with the construct of death, because so many people just don't spend any time at death thinking about death. All they do is they essentially first are introduced to it, the loss of an animal or loss of a grandparent. Then you compartmentalize. Maybe you lose a friend in college, a drunk driving accident, a suicide. But still, we compartmentalize death in such a significant way that it in these circumstances, it's created a massive mental health issue around the world, most notably within young people, in particular teenage girls, and then other young people, young men, 25 to 35 are suffering pretty substantially right now too. So you have this existential reality that is inhibitive. So what I try and really do in the various talks I give is to help people recenter themselves in the fact that, hey, you don't have a lot of control over what the enemy is going to dictate, right? You just don't, and unless you've been integrated into the battlefield for some time, where you've been able to, you are playing major roles in outside components. But, unfortunately, the markets are the markets and kind of world events are dictating those really right now. And that's a big deal. I mean, it's rare that world events dictate the markets in such a substantial in regular way like this is what I'm learning. And again, I'm looking forward to our continuous conversations where you can better help me understand the history of these markets and what's going on. I'm looking forward to that. But so that's what the battlefield is showing us, is that the volatility is here and it's here to stay for a bit. So if that's the reality, if you can't come to a rational understanding of acceptance that, man, I have to operate within what I have to operate in. All right. So how do I do that? First and foremost, I need to understand what I'm really afraid of. And do I have a rational understanding of that fear in the way that I can wake up every day with it, embrace it, and move forward with whatever I'm going to have to confront. And those confrontations are they're substantial and have been and are continuing. I mean, you cannot look at what's going on overseas, look at inflation where it's at, look at where commodities are, look at, the biggest one for me was, potentially that Saudi Arabia is going to take the yen as their currency to purchase their petrodollars. That was a significant one that could have profound ramifications. Even Jerome Powell, talked about at the Fed, hey, the US dollar doesn't need to be the only reserve currency. For me, that was just like, how irresponsible can you be in the current situation, not only for the industry that I'm in, but more importantly, for the confidence that people have as we're staring at 7.9 inflation, right? Like, wait a minute, man, that's not good. So fear, manage that fear, understand it, and then figure out how you're going to manage it. And then really the best way to do that is to after you have that established, reinforce the culture that you're operating within. Because one of the things that takes a big beating under duress is culture, right? It becomes diffused. You start pointing the fingers, or, let's say there's, 5 or 6 people on your team that just are too afraid to come back into the office. They're too afraid to get FaceTime with their clients right now. They're too afraid. They don't want to, whatever the reasons are. You have to bring those people back into an environment that isn't disconnected. And although I love Zoom calls, and it's affording us this incredible opportunity to do this, and I use the same for what I do. I mean, I think I did 38 Zoom presentations and WebEx presentations during COVID for all different types of companies, and unfortunately there's a cognitive dissonance that's involved there in a relationship business. And that's literally every person I go meet with, every great team, every substantial success, I always ask the same question, what is this business about to you? And I haven't met a single person yet that doesn't lead with, it's about the relationships I have with my clients. And you preach that fundamentally. And so if it's a relationship business, then the culture of your organization has to be strong relationships. And after people have gone through these existential shifts in perception, then you need to rebuild that first and foremost. So a big thing I'm promoting right now is, hey, I met with one team individually up in Boston a few months ago, and they're like, what do you think we should do? And I'm like, well, when's the last time you had a profound, multi-day session? And by the way, I love the way you talk about it and in terms of how you meet and how often you brief and you debrief, and the weeklies, the hours, the once a month, and the quarterlies and the annual offsites. And I think right now everybody could use an offsite. Everybody could use 2 days of really drilling back down on the basics, and to kind of bring it back to how I look at this is from my background. We'll go do a 6-month, 7-month deployment on a battlefield, and the op tempo is so substantial that you're trying to keep up with it. You're trying to be successful in your missions and what you're doing, but we're a huge component of your knowledge base comes back when you come back and then share it with the community and say, hey, this is what our platoon or our task unit, what we just learned. And then you spread that information out. And what we do is we reset ourselves around what we just learned, and then we prepare for what we believe the future battlefield is going to look like.
A customized podcast can add credibility and efficiency to your communication efforts, sifting good prospects from the massive suspects, staying top of mind with strategic partners, and activating more advocacy from existing clients can be achieved with a turnkey approach. Learn more at proudmouth.com. Do you aspire to consistently attract and keep great clients while driving the enterprise value of your business? Do you want to achieve professional contrast by supplementing your technical ability with a consistent client experience driven by best practices? The Blue Square Toolkit brings the proven Pareto Systems philosophy and process to life in a way that tethers your team so that you can competitor-proof your clients, gain their full empowerment, and attract quality referrals, all while restoring liberation and order in your life, and all in an intuitive, easy-to-use, turnkey solution. Visit bluesquaretoolkit.com to get your 14-day free trial today. Okay, you cover so much ground on your answers. You should see my notes from that one answer. So, yes, making the main thing after a disruption is to bring back the human touch.
That's right.
And if the team is going to bring back the human touch for the client community, the leader has to bring back the human touch for the team.
That's right.
So it's a cause and effect connection there.
Brilliantly
which
put,
is going to
Duncan.
lead me to a segue, which I want to go deeper. Your sort of former community is fascinating on so many levels. You guys have the best lexicon of terminology of any sector out there. You said something I highlighted, I want to talk to you about further. Fear is often created when you're forced to consume certain information.
That's right.
That is extremely profound. So I want to ask you something. So the pendulum has to swing back from being in this mindset of avoid pain. Let's liberate ourselves to get back into this pursuit of ambitious, the pursuit of achieving excellence. And let's free ourselves to leave that fear behind. So that is one of the responsibilities, in my view, of the leader, is to re-engage the team, to restore that optimism, that ambition, that desire to put some distance between ourselves and everybody else, which
motivation, right? At the core, it's motivation.
Yeah, motivation with specific, sustainable, actionable tactics. So, because this is the next thing I want to ask you, is that back to the main thing, we want to rejuvenate our clients to shake off the amnesia and the loyalty fatigue. Brilliant. That developed because of the disconnect. Yeah, the Zoom was a great sort of stopgap, and yeah, it will now be a supplement in the client experience, but bringing back the human touch, one of the benefits here is to ensure that the reframing, that the team is fixated on reframing the client relationship so that they understand and appreciate what that team can do for the client now and directionally into the future. So there's a cascading benefit here, right? So start with the team, re-engage, rejuvenate, and then have that trickle down to the client community. Is that safe to say?
100%. You can't help your client if you're soup sandwich, right? Like if we're going to do a hostage rescue mission, and half your team, your skill sets are rusty, or there's cobwebs, or you're not quite sure, you've been out of it, or you haven't pulled the trigger in a few months, and then that's just not what we do. I mean, everybody always wants to know, what is the secret sauce? Why do Navy SEALs? Why do they have? Why is it such mythical? Abilities to accomplish the most difficult missions there are in the world. And it's because we seek out that pain. We know the pain is part of the process, right? From day one, you show up at Buds, you are going to have you're going to have pain applied in a positive way day in and day out. Now, we also have within the lines of operant conditioning, we also have a unique way that we, through negative reinforcement, we're able to gain significant growth in an individual as well too, which is a phenomenon in and of itself. Mm-hmm. The overwhelming majority of organizations out there that try and apply negative, it just doesn't work, but for us, it's a lifestyle, it's an all-in approach. And so, it's part of the process that, you could have, the greatest day at Buds or in training, and somebody's still going to pick something you did apart. It's just part of it. It's part of that process for us, that nobody's perfect, but the pursuit of perfection is what is purposeful. Mm. And so that pain is essential. But if you have people that are pulling, if they have, it's almost as if it's like, to use a Jungian phrase, that shadow, right? That shadow component of us, that dark side, right? That has now been exacerbated in particular because of the ramifications of COVID, or maybe you lost your job, or maybe you've had to switch teams, or you moved, or whatever it might be, man, that shadow follows you. And so, again, to go back to that, concept of positive motivation, you have to, very few people are really good at getting rid of that shadow when it's super dark. And so, what do we need? We need that hero story within ourselves to come out. And the way we do that is through the collective, right? If you're suffering with other people and they're all in no matter what. And remember, when, if whether it's your swim buddy right next to you and you look over and you go like, man, I'm miserable. You miserable? It's like, yeah, isn't it cool? You're like, okay, yeah, that's the real right response. Or, you're with your boat crew, you got 7 people and you're under that boat and, the thing's been pounding on your head for 4 straight days in Hell Week. And you're like, if I have to run another 100 feet, my neck's going to snap. I want to quit. And you look over at your buddy and he's like, isn't this awesome, man? And you're like, yeah, that's really awesome. And then you drive on. So that collective processing of pain is essential, I believe, in any successful team. You have to collect, because it has to be incentivized in the proper way with the leader based on what the concrete culture is of the organization.
Okay. Now with that, and forgive me if I'm stretching, because I'm trying to take what you just said and apply it to a day in the life of the leader of the financial professional team. I'm just going to try to see if I can get the symmetry right. So I've often wondered, my experience in your world is primarily watching movies and documentaries, right? It's not experiential. It's virtual, but I've often wondered, okay, so if I'm out there, if I'm deployed for 7 months or 10 months or whatever it is, when I'm alone with my thoughts, it's a quiet moment, I'm in a bit of a emotional or mental no man's land, because you think about pain, I'm thinking about what I left behind at home and what's going on at home that I'm missing. And I'm also thinking about the decisions I'm going to make over that deployment. They're going to impact my legacy and how I'm perceived and the impact I'm going to have on people in my life. So where I'm going with this, okay, David, is lifelong planners in this world, in the spirit of beginning with the end in mind, need to create a clearly defined beacon around their own continuity and succession plan that not only ties to their own team, but also applies to their own clients. So help me round that out. Okay, so no man's land, looking back, looking forward, and understanding the incrementalism of the impact as it relates to the value I bring to the world, but also my own legacy. Can you help me make sense of all that?
Yeah, for sure. I love how you look at it as the wasteland, right? And kind of my frame of reference is we all have to kind of go out into the desert, don't we, to find ourselves. And that concept really, if there is going to be this legacy plan and you are going to you're going to move through this, and what seems to be very challenging in many cases, and the people I'm running into, that it almost becomes so overwhelming, that the magnitude of work that needs to go into that, right? That, oh my God, I have to really dig in. And now obviously they have people like you and Chris that can really help guide them and help give them a structure to that. But at the end of the day, you got to do the work. You got to take what you guys are teaching and apply it and put it to practice. And that's painful. And so, I think what you have is people need to go out, or they've been out in the wasteland. They've been out in the desert for the last 2 years. They're coming back. And now it's like, hey, if I want this thing to work and I want this transitional plan to be implemented and to be followed through, I can't work 20-hour work weeks. I can't, spend 30 minutes a week with the person I'm grooming as the COO of my organization. I can't hire these kid analysts who I didn't really do a deep dive and the exact person I wanted to bring in the organization, right, to help facilitate this transition, right? Because that I see happening a tremendous amount right now. One, there's so few quality, people. I'm not going to say that. It's very frustrating finding quality people right now. Let me put it that way. And so that frustration that parlays itself into, I believe, this procrastination, if you will. Like, hey, no, you got to dig in and implement this thing. You gotta get after it. You gotta take whatever plan you're gonna approach that's gonna, whatever tactics, TTPs that you want to use. And again, the more I'm trying to understand this industry in depth in this capacity, the more I'm learning. And there's not a tremendous amount of tactics out there. I mean, it's and again, I just want to say, I mean, I've been in and around the space for a while, but not in this intricacies, right? And I love the word you use, incremental, right? Each one of these processes is all imbued with this incremental concept. It's little bit. Now, it's up to you how often you want to tweak that little bit with how fast it's going to happen, and I'm a big person that, like, hey, if you want to drive hard for 90 days, right? See if you can drive hard for 90 days. This whole 30 days and it's a habit, or 28 days or 40, it's all a load of nonsense. In reality, what I believe, it's 2 years to really effectuate substantial difference in how you think, act, and feel. But if you want to implement a process and make it stick, man, you got to drive hard for 90 days. And
I totally agree, because if you read The Tipping Point and the whole premise of the 10,000 hours to mastery, probably 100 at least to get some traction, to disrupt, put some old habits behind you and just get rolling in terms of trajectory.
It could be 180. For me, it's 2 years. Because 2 years in an immersive program, where all you're doing day in, day out is just eat, sleeping, and breathe, and whatever it is, you can get it done. But if you're going to, like we said, the little incremental, man, that 2 years could be 4 years to shift a culture, 4 years to shift process, or to tighten them up. So it really comes down to go do the soul searching, go out, walk out in the desert, figure out what kind of pain you're ready for, come back, and then, dig in and drive for as long as you can drive. Take a break. If you need, take a week off, go skiing in Vail or wherever you go, or whatever, go to the Bahamas and go fishing or whatever you do, and then come back and drive for 90 days. And you'll see, man, you'll see now your people seeing you get back into the trenches and living with that pain and that positive aspect, that motivation, that pain. Like, I'm going to get this done. Damn it. This is, like you said, legacy. And that's an interesting concept to deconstruct when you really drill down on it on an individual level, man. Because when you push people and you really get people to explore what that looks like, people often have a very different concept than when they first started evaluating that. It can be radically different once you push people into really evaluating. So I think it's getting in there, man, and doing the work. That's huge.
Well, let me give you my interpretation of what you said there, because earlier you talked about the enemy. And I think in this context, the enemy isn't a competitor. I don't even know if it's external dependencies. I think it is our own complacency, our own cognitive dissonance. We place ourselves in these echo chambers of beliefs. And what's interesting is, you talk about no man's land or wasteland. The softer sort of business version of that is the interlude, right? It's the space between, right? So you've got your former self, you've got your best version of yourself, if you think of the Venn diagram.
Yep.
And between those two connecting those two circles is the interlude. And I think part of the goal, because clients are watching, team members are watching, our families watching, and we have our own dual track. So there's a qualitative aspect around legacy, and that is, I don't subscribe not just to mediocrity, but just the status quo. I want to find a bigger way, and I'm okay with dealing with the pain, risk avoidance, pain avoidance. I'm okay. I'm okay with that. But here's the interesting thing: legacy in this space involves how we're perceived, how we're described, how we're remembered, how we're respected. That's qualitative. It's meaningful. But then there's measurable, the quantitative, because so many people we're talking to now are starting to think about their exit. Mm-hmm. And we're spending so much time on enterprise value. And I got to tell you, David, I had a conversation on Friday with a leader in this space in Houston, coincidentally, who I respect. I've known him for a long time, and he is incredibly ambitious, has incredible execution and tremendous quantitative success. But he really bared his soul to me on Friday because of the issue on team dynamics, securing good talent, the market forces around retaining talent. And he said to me on Friday, for the first time in my life, I got an offer for my business that I'm actually entertaining because I think I'm done with the hassle factor.
Whoa.
And I'm like, okay, dude.
And this guy you're saying is like, he's done it. He's squared away. He's gotten it done on every level, but he's over it.
He's not, I think he just wanted to say it out loud.
And
get my reaction. And I said to him, I said, there is so much gas in the tank, but you don't need this abrupt rip the bandage off. It's done. You're out. Maybe what you need to do is have a liquidity event, sell a portion of the business that comes with some of that hassle factor, and just focus on what they're doing. I just said to him, I said, what would it look like? Oh, and by the way, because he just came back from Cabo. Right. And I said to him, I said, dude, what would it look like if you had 25 awesome clients, just your favorite clients? And he interrupted me and he said, my top 25 clients represent about 70% of my profitability and about 1% of my hassle factor. And I said, okay, so let's just reimagine what growth looks like for you. And then, so maybe you're doing your team members and the rest of your clients a disservice by keeping them. Maybe you're going to have an event where you're just going to liberate yourself from some of that, elevate all of them to find a better environment. You can steer the way and just put yourself in a place where, because he's at the stage in his life, he God willing, could live for another 30 years.
Yeah.
So what, on your terms, just make it as pleasant and fulfilling. But you don't need to just get out. Just reimagine what it looks like going forward. So my point is, David, the qualitative and quantitative elements, that dual track of legacy and enterprise value simultaneously. What a tremendous gift based on demography, market forces, and just the ability to self-actualize. I'd love your perspective on that.
Man, one of the things that we deal with substantially in our world is that identity shift. And I think a lot of people, they really don't give it much credence until it hits them in the face. And we have profound challenges from that because we integrate the mindset of being a Navy SEAL, being in special operations to our core, because you have to. It is not a part-time existence, right? You are either all in and you're going to be a good operator. Some people are great operators, or you're not, and you're going to risk somebody getting killed or getting yourself killed. So for us, it is the all in. And so when you hit that point, and I see this all the time with the professional athletes I work with in particular that are going into transition or whatever, is that, here I've been this thing for my whole life. And so I think this way, and people really don't understand, it's a deeper thing than that. Who am I going to be when I don't have this? And that's why I really loved your concept that you shared with your friend, that, hey, you don't need to be completely over in one moment, because what are you going to be? How are you going to rationalize your own identity? How many days in a row can you sit in Cabo on a beach drinking pina coladas before you're like, all right, I'm numb? And then I love all the answers. Well, I'm going to become entrepreneurial. I'm going to invest in this, and I'm going to get involved in a tech startup, and I'm going to sit on a bunch of boards and all this. And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds great. But what does that look like? Which ones are you going after? What tech? I'll figure it out. And I'm like, that's not how it works, man. I mean, it's just not how it works. And so, for me, the way I look at it, for these individuals who've spent the majority of their life building these books, businesses, you need to spend a little time on what the other side looks like. Not so much from a financial perspective. Obviously, everybody wants that quantitative measurement. I want to sell my book for as big a stroke as I can get. And then that's indicative of how successful I am. Absolutely. Roger that. I couldn't agree more. I think we all do it. We all value ourselves accordingly. In particular, if you're in that financial industry, I mean, every day, all day, what you have, how much you're managing, how big is your book? How big is your book? What's your book look like? How much, what do your clients look like? How much do they have? How much do they have with you? How much do they have with, and it's quantitative, like day in and day out. I mean, it's the essence of the business, right? It's quantitative, but the qualitative needs to be a much deeper dive focus with who am I going to be afterwards? Right. One of the things I love, my dad, God bless him, man, is 77 years old. He's an attorney, ran a pretty decent sized law firm for 45 years, and has been individual by himself for the last 10, practicing kind of on his own, or not 10, but around that. And 9 now. And, he's still got 4 or 5 clients that he still works with, because, all of his other buddies that retired 15 years ago, they can't play any more golf. They can't travel any more than they travel. They've been everywhere. They've seen everything. They've played every golf course there is. So it's like, what is your purpose? What meaning do you have to fulfill yourself? I mean, being a grandparent, yeah, that's fulfilling, but how active are you going to be actually in the development of your grandchildren? It's really more just about the memories, if you will, I think. But like for yourself, how do you look at yourself in the mirror every day and go, all right, I have all this wisdom, I have all this knowledge. Where am I going to place it now? What am I going to do? And then, you always, you're going to, in being an entrepreneur, what does that mean? How much time a week does entrepreneur mean? Every entrepreneur I know is working 100 hours a week, my one buddy who just kind of rang the bell, my buddy, Evan Hafer, who owns Black Rifle Coffee, they just went public at $1.7 billion, and I remember talking to him 10 years ago when he put a second mortgage on his house. He sold every gun he had. He leveraged himself to the hilt with this concept to buy a roaster. And he's like, I'm all in. And there's no doubt Evan now is like, I always thinking, what am I going to do next? What's my next thing, And so all of that to say this, hey, as you begin to plan for this transition, do the deep dive work on yourself. Mm-hmm. How are you going to take this former identity, the former self, and what are you going to morph it into this new identity? And one of the suggestions that I make pretty regularly to people out there, if you don't know, and you don't even know how to begin, go do some volunteer work, right? I don't care what it is, whether it's mentoring, coaching, right? Maybe it's becoming a referee. Maybe it's joining a nonprofit. Maybe it's building a house in Haiti or whatever it is. But, go sacrifice your time at a lower value than what you're what you're traditionally used to. Because, granted, if you're in that place where you're lucky enough to be able to sell a book of business, right, you've got those opportunities. But go get into those humble situations where pain is the pain of your lack of wisdom for a particular specified area of action has the opportunity to bring in your worldly wisdom, to bring in the wisdom of what your 30, 40-year career looks like, but also in that space of humility that, hey man, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just here to support the greater good, if you will. And that's a wonderful space for that exploration to truly begin.
Wow. I mean, you said it so powerfully around purpose, and that's a very personal, individual thing. But I completely agree. Right toward the end of this next book that Chris and I are just about ready to let go to the world, there's a little tribute to Gandhi, who does say the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So that benevolence piece is powerful. I will say this, because hindsight is such a freaky part of the human experience, right? But
it's everything. And when you start digging into the historical nature of our narratives, the mythology of our narratives, it is this juxtaposition of experience, which creates story, which creates experience. And so that interesting, that's kind of how we formulate our progression in life is through that duality, that our own human experiences are the way we seek out the journeys we choose to go on are inspired by these mythological stories or narratives that have been ingrained in our culture for 25,000 years in many cases, and that's what spawns the next thing. So it can be confusing at times. What's guiding us, right? Is it a traditional narrative of who we think we want to become, right? Whatever our purpose or meaning is, or is it a derivative of the experience of what we know we don't want to be? And it's that juxtaposition.
The pursuit of excellence versus the avoidance of pain, right?
That's
interesting
right.
Connection there. Well, it's interesting, and we can wrap up on this, but I do want to come back to legacy and that Gandhi quote. To me, I completely agree with it, but I also agree that the best way to take care of the world is to take impeccable care of yourself. Amen. And that comes back to that sense of purpose. You would have seen this working in the sports community. A star pitcher loses his fastball and he makes a decision. Okay, I'm either going to hang in there and maybe embarrass myself, or I'm going to reimagine my style and work around that to stay relevant. That's a decision. And one involves pain. Well, they both involve pain, but one requires obviously some effort and some risk. It's interesting. Last night, I was actually on the ski hill with our family, and my nephew and my youngest son, we really love Formula One racing.
Yeah.
And I was telling him about an experience I had, a close call with Ayrton Senna, and who I think was a phenomenally well-rounded person. But one of his friends said to him, apparently, that you have nothing left to prove. Like, you've accomplished everything. Let's go fishing. Let's go have some fun. Let's just go and detach from this. And apparently he said, I can't. This is what I'm here to do. And I'm impacting so many people's lives directly and indirectly. And then, of course, not long after that, apparently he ended up losing his life on the track, which was, just a phenomenal. But I'm trying to, in my conversation with my nephew and my son, just trying to make sense of God's will, free will, and how that dynamic intersects. And where is that inside voice? Like, what's propelling the inside voice, right? When I'm alone with my thoughts, Is it my experience? Is it a combination of hindsight, judgment, wisdom, and how much of it is externally being popped in there? I don't know. One of the mysteries, but
it's the greatest mystery.
Ultimately, yes. So legacy, qualitative, quantitative, I think if nothing else, just sort of thinking about it, getting out in front of it is important. But I'll tell you something, man. It is very admirable how you are taking your own history and shaping your impact in this industry by being a serious student and understanding a day in the life of these people, especially in light of these force majeures that we're experiencing. So,
well, the one thing, can I just hop in real quick, Duncan, on that point? Just real quick, try and make a quick point. But the one thing that I'm witnessing, and this is a profound truth across the entire world, right? Is people that have significant financial platforms, let's say that, have the greatest impact in the world because they can utilize that capital for whatever reason they want. And if they want to just ride around in their mega yacht or go fishing on a regular basis or whatever, then so be it. But those people that take that wealth and try and make an impact with it, those are the people that are going to be able to cultivate that emergent legacy. Because, right, the human being's legacy is not one chapter of their life. It's the entirety of their story, right? In our world, we always ask the question, what's your dash going to say? Mm-hmm. What's your dash? And that's the little dash in between your birth date and your death date. And, and I have a lot of friends that have an early death date, but that dash, man, they had a profound impact on the world. And in many different ways. And so, I think when you think of legacy, don't just think about the legacy of what you accomplished business-wise. Mm-hmm. Think about the legacy of what this next step is, how that's going to be integrated with your financial success. And the final thing, I'll just say is man, nobody takes it all with you. It does not go with you. At all. And so, don't be afraid. Once you make sure, your family's taken care of and the people that you care about are organizations and you've done what you did, don't be afraid. Get out there and spend that money in ways that are going to have a profound impact on you, but more importantly, in the service of others, because there's no greater legacy than that.
I'm trying to give you the last word, but you say such profound things. You just draw things out of me. But I had a mentor way back in life who said, look, money is going to make you more of who you are. If you're a jerk and you get rich, you'll be a bigger jerk. If you're benevolent, if you're honorable, and if you care about others, it will serve you incredibly well. So I
love that. That's got to be one of the best lines ever. I mean, money makes you what you are. Yeah.
Well, and there's a stage of readiness for that because you think about the space we're in. So your point about wealth creation, a means to an end. It's not the end because not to get heavy here, but I've known some people.
Get heavy. I love when you get heavy because you're profound when you're heaviness, Duncan.
Listen, man, I know some people, incredible success, and they died at their desk.
Oh,
and a little bit of.
Did they die doing what they love to be doing though? Or is it, do you think they died because they didn't get out and do what they needed to do?
Who am I to say?
Yeah. Good point.
But ultimately, I think it's what they knew. And maybe they sort of accidentally drifted into that pattern. And there was a little bit of collateral damage behind them. And maybe they were risk averse in terms of letting that definition of themselves go a little bit.
Identity. To
let that money become a means to other ends. I don't know. I'm trying not to judge too much, but I do believe that God puts us in these experiences and environments to serve us, not hurt us, right? That's another aspect of legacy, in my view. But I'm really hoping you see the merit in coming back and revisiting and going a little bit deeper. I know you're on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So anybody listening in, please get connected with David Rutherford on LinkedIn. Where else can people find you, especially as it relates to Frog Logic? Because I have to think that if I'm a financial professional and I'm thinking about second and third generation clients, wouldn't be a bad idea to put some of those books you've written in the hands of my clients to help their kids in the spirit of community develop some of that courage and resilience and situational awareness, confidence, all of these qualities that seem to be throttled down. And I think your resources could help. So where can people find that?
The easiest way, again, I'm on LinkedIn, but just my website at teamfroglogic.com. That's the other real place. And we're currently in the process of developing our own app. So there will be a Frog Logic app probably out midsummer to where we'll have a truckload of curriculum within the Frog Logic Institute where we teach fear, self-confidence, team life, and purpose. And then we'll also have a huge kind of community of motivational concepts. And I'm going to have other people that I believe are spectacular in terms of their awareness. We're going to put up their courses, their curriculum there. So we're going to get back out there in earnest here relatively short. But in the meantime, you can find us at teamfroglogic.com.
Terrific. And I'm going to be relentless on you to NFT that logo.
Yeah.
Because if that ape NFT can run the way it did, that one's better in my view. So we'll have that another conversation. But just terrific. I got so much out of this. The notes are just, I'll keep this forever. And again, I hope you see the merit in picking this back up sometime down the road. But I really appreciate your time.
You are a force of positivity, man. I love your approach. I think your insights are profound. I think any team that will do itself an immense favor by just exposing themselves to what you got going on. And I feel honored that you would even consider having me on your show with your level of expertise in this space. And then the grace with which she's just allowed me to contribute is profound. And I'm humbled. And I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Well, don't let me brush that off with this comment. I really do appreciate that, but I am going to need you to text all of that to my wife and kids.
You got it. Absolutely.
Give me a little bit more credit out there.
That's a done deal, man. That's what I love to do. I love to share how much people impact me with their family. It just, sometimes we lose sight of that, right? Sometimes, we become detached from the impact our family members are having in their own worlds. And I think what it takes is a little bit of that connectivity, a little bit of exposure, if you will, to the impact that people can have and are having out there day in and day out. So anybody who's listening, man, just take a time and just try and see what your loved ones are doing in the world and then compliment on it.
Beautiful. Okay, man. Thank you very much. We'll see you hopefully out in the field sometime sooner than later. But in the meantime, let's just keep the conversation going.
Amen. God bless you, Duncan.
Hey,
Thank you so much.
Take it easy. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Always On with Duncan MacPherson, where our objective is to enable professionals to always be working on their business and on themselves. Want to learn more about Duncan and his team? Visit ParetoSystems.com. Don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and/or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Pareto Systems. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast is powered by Proudmouth, the Influence Accelerators. If you're like me and want to spend more time educating people and less time selling, Proudmouth helps turn Main Street experts like you into trusted mainstream authorities. They will help amplify your influence over a growing audience of magnetically attracted fans. Visit proudmouth.com to learn more.